Hello, this is our fifth and last video on terminal aerodrome forecasts. And our last video will deal with flight planning. Whenever you plan a flight, you should always be conservative and look for the worst weather at your destination. So, in other words, you may have a tempo group that is really bad and prevailing conditions that are really good. What happens if you arrive at the airport and you just happen to arrive at the time that the weather conditions are coming down? You need to plan conservatively, so always use the lowest conditions at the airport. Forecasters realize that weather conditions are critical to flight operations. They know the numbers. You should know them too. And here's some numbers for you for critical operations or significant operations at airports. When the ceiling drops below 2,000 and the visibility drops below 3 miles, that's when alternate requirements dictate that you might need more fuel on your aircraft and you may need to go to another airport. So flight planning wise, you have to increase your flight time and also your fuel requirements. Also, at airports that are used as alternates, if it is a non-precision approach, you need visibilities greater than 2 miles and ceilings greater than 800 feet. At precision airports, you can't use it unless the visibility is more than 2 miles and more than 600 feet for the ceiling. And then, of course, when the ceiling and visibility go below 200.5, the airport, for the most part, is unusable unless they have Cat 3 approaches or things like that. So normal approaches, normal airports, typically you can't dispatch going into an airport with those types of conditions. So that's just kind of a quick overview. We're going to get into some details now. We're going to practice this because it's one thing to know how to read a TAF. It's another thing to actually use it. So the first thing that we're going to look at is VFR Operations. And according to the Federal Aviation Regulation 91-155C, it says no person may operate an aircraft beneath the ceiling under VFR within the lateral boundaries of controlled airspace that goes down to the surface for an airport when the ceiling is less than 1,000 feet. And it goes on to say also that no person may take off or land an aircraft or enter the traffic pattern of an airport under VFR within the lateral boundaries of the surface areas of a Class B, C, D, or E airspace designated for that airport unless the ground visibility is at least 3 miles. So what they're saying here is that at some airports, controlled airspace goes down to the ground, and if there's weather reporting at those airports, then you need at least a ceiling of more than 1,000 feet, 1,000 or more, and visibilities 3 or more. That's your 1003 rule. If the airport has ceilings less than 1,000 and or visibilities less than 3 miles, technically the airport is IFR, and the rotating beacon will go on to indicate that it is IFR. So we're going to look at an example. We're going to take a VFR flight to International Falls, and we're going to look at the weather, the TAF for that location, and try and determine if it's VFR or IFR. Now, International Falls has Class E airspace. They have an ASOS or AWOS machine. Actually, it is an ASOS machine. So we'll look at that. They've got controlled airspace to the ground. So at International Falls, if we plan to arrive at 4 UTC, 4 Zulu, then looking at this TAF, and it would be the third line down, second and third line. The second line says from the 16th day at 1 Zulu, and that goes all the way to the next from group, which will be 6 Zulu on the 16th. Those are the weather conditions. The prevailing conditions: winds 240 at 4, visibilities barren 6, scattered at 2,400, overcast at 5. But there are temporary conditions. For a very short period of time, weather conditions may come down between 3 and 6 Zulu, where you might have visibilities of 3 miles, light snow, and broken at 2,000. So looking at that, the lowest ceiling is 2,000, the lowest visibility is 3 miles. if the ceiling goes below 1,000 or the visibility goes below 3 miles, the airport would be IFR. In this case, it never goes below that, so the airport remains VFR. You can fly there legally VFR. Granted, 3 miles is pretty low. If you're doing it cross country, it depends upon your personal limits. And then for an IFR flight, it states that each person filing an IFR flight plan must include an alternate. You have to include an alternate. In other words, another airport that you plan to fly to if you can't get into the airport of your first destination. So you need to put on your flight plan an alternate and also carry the required fuel to get to your alternate, unless your destination, your first airport, has an instrument approach procedure and the weather reports or forecasts indicate for an hour before to an hour after the estimated time of arrival, the ceiling is at least 2,000 feet, 2,000 or greater, and the visibility is at least 3 miles, 3 miles or greater. So this is your 1, 2, 3 rule. 1, 2, 3, 1 hour before to 1 hour after your estimated time of arrival, the ceiling needs to be more than 2,000, 2,000 or more, and visibility needs to be 3 miles or more. So once again, be conservative. Always use the lowest group, whether it be tempo, prob, or even the prevailing conditions, and be conservative. So here's our flight. We're going to International Falls. We know that it has controlled airspace to the ground. We know it has an ASOS machine there that measures the weather. And also we know that it has an instrument approach procedure. So if we're flying to International Falls, we plan to get there at 4 Zulu. Do we need an alternate? So looking at that, that falls in between the from group that starts at 1 and the from group that starts at 6. So during that time period, you see the weather conditions are wind 210 at 4, visibility is better than 6, scattered at 2,400, overcast at 5. That's good. But in the tempo group, it comes down between 3 and 6, and you're looking at the forecast period of 3 to 5. That's an hour before to an hour after. The visibilities may come down to 3 miles, and you may have broken clouds at 2,000. That's still good. If it was below 3 or below 2, then you would need to file an alternate and put more gas in the airplane. In this case, you have no problem. You don't need to file an alternate. However, if your flight is delayed, let's say that it's delayed an hour and a half, and you're leaving or you're going to arrive at 5:30 Zulu instead, then that still puts you in the same time group from 1 Zulu until 6 Zulu, but you need to consider an hour before and an hour after. An hour after would be 6:30 Zulu, and that would push you into the next time group. The next time group is at 6 Zulu, and it would give you winds 180 at 4, visibility is 2 miles, which is less than 3, slight snow, and overcast at 1,800, which is less than 2,000. So if you get delayed, then you are going to have to file an alternate, and you have to figure out a good alternate, and you have to make sure you have enough gas in your tanks to get to that alternate. So that is the last video on TAFs. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this was valuable information.